But Terry Fontenot, and we'll get to this, Jeff, he's, as good as he did in this draft, he's kind of on thin ice with the Falcons.
Yeah, I mean, but that's something that we've addressed for a while. I mean, this isn't shocking news. And I know that it came up earlier this week on X, and I'm trying to figure out why. And somebody had made the comment about how Fontenot, like Thomas Dimitroff, was really good, in the early rounds and really bad in the late rounds. And I don't know what the fuck anybody was watching, but Thomas Dimitroff was fucking terrible in the first two rounds. Anybody can draft Matt Ryan. Anybody can draft the number one quarterback in the draft. Anybody can go get Julio Jones. Like, Helen Keller could have done both of those things, right? Like, it wasn't something that he should have been able to, to write off in the sunset of how great he was as a GM. But I will give it to Thomas Dimitroff. That dude was money in the late rounds. You look at all of the dudes that he went out and got in the late rounds. I mean, I want to say it's like 5 or 6 Pro Bowl players or all pro players that he went and got in rounds 3 through 7. Thomas Dimitroff was fucking terrible in rounds 1 and 2, but that dude was absolute money in 3 through 7. We can talk about the Keanu Neals. We can talk about the Grady Jarretts. We can talk about Austin tight end.
Hooper.
Austin Hooper, right? Those guys were all late round pick, 3rd through 7th round picks. And like Thomas Dimitroff was really good in those rounds. He was really good at finding those diamonds in the rough. Terry Fontenot has not been very good overall. I mean, yes, again, kind of going out. Anybody could go get Bijan Robinson, right? Like that's not difficult to do. He was the best running back in the draft. Anybody can go get Kyle Pitts. I mean, he was the highest rated tight end of all time. May not have wanted to take him 4th overall, but it doesn't mean that he wasn't the can't miss prospect that year. And sure, we can sit here and we can play Monday morning quarterback and we can try to, do revisionist history. But I mean, if you go back to Kyle Pitts, there were people talking about him being good enough to be the number 1 overall pick coming out of Florida. Right. So like we want to give, Drake London, I think is a guy that shocked a lot of people. Obviously, Michael Penix did. Drake London is a top 10 receiver in the NFL, and I don't think that's debatable at this point. I mean, he was, 5th or 6th last year in yards. We've already talked kind of in depth. I've tweeted about how good this wide receiving core is here in Atlanta, and it starts with Drake London. Michael Penix kind of yet to be determined, but he looks like he's going to be really good. But overall, Thomas Dimitroff's draft process has been absolutely fucking terrible. And I don't think that there's any way to discredit that, to say, no, you're wrong, Jeff. His rounds 3 through 7 where Thomas Dimitroff shined, Terry Fontenot's been absolute fucking trash. And that's being nice, right? I don't know a different way to put it. You guys know me. I'm going to be vulgar and I'm going to be honest with you. So Terry Fontenot has, he's got to hope that this draft class is as good as we all think it is, because this draft class, he absolutely knocked it out of the park. And we're talking 1st round, 3rd round, 5th, like every
undrafted free agents.
Yeah, like every single pick this year, he got above value for the guys that he took this year. And so maybe this was finally the turning point for him. Obviously, we don't know, and we won't know for 2 or 3 years. But as of right now, it looks like this was his first draft that he absolutely knocked out of the park. And maybe this is the start of something phenomenal for him.
Yeah, and Jeff, this surfaced, and by the way, let's just get into this segment. I was going to kind of save this for the end, but we're in it. This surfaced on X because your former employer, 92.9, they actually had an episode or a segment just on this, that Terry Fontenot is on. He's fighting for his job. So that I think that's where all of this started resurfacing. You were talking about this very early on in the offseason. This was make or break. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, but the Falcons were close to letting go of Fontenot this past offseason, right?
They were. If you guys remember, at the end of back in January, kind of right there at the end of the season, I talked about how, it was roughly, I said, I haven't put a percentage on it. The percentage I was given was 80% out the door. Like, he was done. And Arthur Blank wanted to give him 1 more year. And so I do think it's funny that 92.9 decided that this was the topic they were going to bring up, because ultimately I was the only one that reported any of that to begin with. And remember, I'm just some loser who's in my mom's basement, apparently, that I haven't lived in 30 fucking years. But so it's funny that they take up a topic where, I was the only guy, and still the only person I told you guys, he was 80% out that door before Arthur Blank said, you know what, we're going to give him one more opportunity to get this thing right. And I think you've seen the verification of that by how he's acted this offseason. Free agency was really, really good for him. No, we didn't get the big free agents. We didn't make, trades happen, but he was in on a lot of guys. And then again, the draft process he took this year was very different than we've seen his first couple of years. And the results initially are very different, right? So, he knows his ass is on fire. The city knows it. And I think he's responded really well. And if Raheem Morris is the coach that everybody hopes he is, you'll see that translate into wins on the field.
So part of Dimitrov's, not being able to get maximum value in the first round, in my opinion, is also the fact that we played really well early on in his tenure, right? When you have the 3rd overall pick and Matt Ryan's on the board, no brainer. When you trade up with Cleveland, you're number 6 overall, you're going to get a good player there in Julio Jones. But when we're making the playoffs year after year and we're picking towards the end of those rounds, that's where the first round picks become a lot more like second round picks. So I don't know. I mean, I wish that Dimitrov, didn't get McKinley, or instead of Ridley thought about getting Lamar Jackson, thought about getting, putting his eyes more towards the future. But, it didn't happen. And on the flip side, Jeff, Terry Fontenot, his first round picks, the lowest he had was this year, 15. Everything else was 8, 8, 8, and 4. Like that. I mean, those are very easy spots to pick from. And by the way, picking 4, Kyle Pitts was highly regarded or whatever, number 1 tight end off the board, but you still fucking missed. Yeah, at the end of the day, I don't care what the process is. You missed with the 4th overall pick. That's not great. Can he get better is the question. And that, I think you got to kind of let the GM cook, develop. Look what happened to Howie Roseman, Jeff. There was a point in Eagles history when Chip Kelly came through the door and he was annexed away with all those Eagles brain trust guys that did all these sophisticated moves with the contracts and everything. They were annexed in a separate building, not to hear from anybody. Chip Kelly was running the show. He ran the freaking Eagles to the ground. Jeff, Chip Kelly was sort of like the chemotherapy that the Eagles needed. He just kind of destroyed everything good and bad with the organization, and what came in the Eagles at the end of the day after Chip Kelly was just a blank canvas. Howie Roseman resurfaced, and then he started hitting his draft picks after misses, after losing his power to Chip Kelly. There was a power struggle there. All this to say, Jeff, we got to let this guy develop a little bit. Now, while he had easy picks in London and Bijan, taking Penix, that, whether that's him or not, that takes balls, man. Especially when you hand $100 million to Kirk Cousins. You're basically saying we made a mistake. We should have been with 9 all along and shouldn't have handed him $100 million. Like, he deserves credit there. What he's done bad in the draft, I want to offset that he actually had, I think, in my opinion, he does well in free agency. Jesse Bates, we talked about it last podcast. Probably one of the best Falcons free agents in quite some time. Darnell Mooney, Caden Ellis. I mean, the guy is pretty good at identifying free agents. He looks like he's getting better at identifying the draft. I don't think that I think he is on thin ice. I don't want him to be on thin ice, though. I want the guy to learn and grow, and he's showing improvement, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think, but what's tough with the NFL, and we see it from players, and obviously coaches and GMs don't get as much slack as players do. It's a win now league. You don't get opportunities to make mistakes, and you don't get opportunities to make mistakes twice. And yes, we can look at the Eagles and we can look at the 49ers and we can look at a host of other teams. But if replicating success was easy, everybody would be doing it, right? And this is a copycat league. Teams try to copy what successful teams are doing, and yet those teams that are copying the successful ones end up right back in the top 10 of the draft. And so I don't think it's ever fair to compare to anybody. And I know we've done that with Thomas Dimitroff, and I know we've done that with others. But Terry Fontenot's got to be his own guy. He's dealing with a different set of parameters. He's dealing with a different fan base. He's dealing with a different city. He's dealing with different players. And so ultimately for me, as a GM, to be successful, you have to be able to have the right scouting team in place. If you don't have that, nothing else matters. If you don't trust the guys you have in place, nothing else matters. And you also have to trust your boss. And more importantly, your boss has to trust you. And I think that there were some of those issues here in Atlanta with Rich McKay. Still wasn't taking a hands-off approach. And if you guys remember, Rich McKay came out and talked about how he thought that the way he did it in Atlanta was going to be replicated all over the league. Because at one point he had he had Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith both reporting to him. Arthur Smith didn't report to the general manager. He reported to the president of operations, which wasn't done on any other team. And Rich McKay was like, well, no, everybody's going to move to this. And nobody fucking did. And next thing you know, Rich McKay was allegedly taking over the Atlanta United, which is a whole other dumpster fire. So I think ultimately Atlanta had to pull their head out of their ass. They had to get the right people in place. And I feel like they've made some changes. There have been some wholesale changes on the scouting staff, behind closed doors, in the front office with different personnel. And this will be the first year, truly, and I think I said this last year, but really when you look at all of the new faces for people that we don't know, people we don't see, people who aren't listed on the website, there's a lot of new faces in place. And so this will be a really, really good gauge of how good Terry Fontenot actually is at hiring the right personnel to make sure he can do his job correctly. And so, again, I think so far, I think they've won the day. I think they've won every day since late April with the draft. And hopefully they continue to do so.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And look, Fontenot made his mistakes, as did, Howie. He took Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson. He, gave Bryce Huff a pretty large contract there. Paid him $25 million, Jeff, last offseason in 2024. The guy started 6 games, only had 2.5 sacks, and he was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. So it's okay for a GM to make mistakes. However, Fontenot really needs the Falcons to make the playoffs here. Otherwise, I don't know, barring Pierce or Walker winning Defensive Rookie of the Year and 9 lighting the year on fire, I don't know how he keeps his job if we miss the playoffs.
If Atlanta misses the playoffs, he doesn't keep his job. I mean, it's just as simple as that. Arthur Blank is not going to go. If they miss the playoffs, this will be 8 straight years since 2017. If they miss the playoffs for the 8th straight year, half of those will have been on Terry Fontenot. He's out of the job, and we'll be looking for another GM. So there is no scenario. Barring everybody gets hurt. I mean, it's the NFL. Guys are going to get hurt. But your job as the GM is to stack that roster to make sure that you can kind of limit just how big. And let's be honest, this is fucking Atlanta. This isn't Pittsburgh or Cleveland or Dallas where you've got that stud on defense. Like, this is fucking Atlanta. We don't have guys that other teams are yearning for. There's no reason that your number 2 or possibly number 3 guy should have that big of a drop off. Right? Like, we're not talking about a stacked roster here in Atlanta. We're talking about a roster that Thomas Dimitroff should be having some really good competition at. And therefore, to the point that you made last week or 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, with iron sharpening iron, when we talked about Jesse Bates, that should be the case, right? So if there is an injury to a rookie, there shouldn't be that big of a drop-off behind the guy that comes in and steps in behind him, right? So to me, the injury excuse will not be one. If this team fails to make the playoffs here in 2025, Terry Fontenot will have to go back to New Orleans.
Is there any scenario where we make the playoffs, but the Falcons fire him anyways?
No.
Okay.
I don't. For this team to make the playoffs, they're going to have to click on all cylinders. This is not an overly it's a good team. There's some really good talent on this team, and I think we're doing a really good job on this podcast of highlighting that talent. But overall, you're still really young. And so, really young teams have to click in order to make the playoffs. You can't just show up every Sunday and think that you're going to win enough games to make the playoffs. So if they do make the playoffs, he'll get a lot of credit for it, as he should, because when you look at this roster, he's put together, with the exception of a handful of guys, he's put together this roster, and this will be his. So, yeah, if they make the playoffs, he will have a job. If they miss the playoffs, he will be looking for a job.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking out loud, I think like Jake Matthews is probably one of the old holdovers of Thomas Dimitrov's teams. I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head. I'm sure there's one or two others, but I know Matthews is one of them. So interesting. We'll see what happens, and hopefully, Falcons just crush it, and Terry keeps growing, getting better, and we have ourselves a GM. Because for everything he's missed on in the draft, or even I complimented his free agency, but when he joined in 2021, he did have a big miss. He couldn't identify Hendrickson. The year Hendrickson became a free agent was the first year Terry Fontenot took over as the GM for the Falcons. Like, we've had an anemic pass rush this whole time. This being being in New Orleans, like Hendrickson would have been the perfect fit in hindsight in 2021. So you had a miss there, but you're gonna have these misses. It's very easy, to your point, to play Monday morning quarterback with this sort of thing. So all the best to him.